America's $10 billion plan to reopen these abandoned islands. They're building it right now. Somewhere in the Pacific, there is a runway that launched the atomic bomb. It's been buried under a jungle for 75 years. America is spending $10 billion to dig it back up, and it's not the only one. The second island chain. Why these islands matter now. To understand why, you need to understand a concept called the second island chain. During the Cold War, American strategists drew an imaginary line across the Pacific, a series of islands running from Japan south through the Marianas, through Micronesia and Palau. The idea was simple. As long as the United States controlled the air and sea lanes along that chain, any military force trying to project power eastward into the open Pacific would have to fight through it first. For decades, that line was largely theoretical. The U.S. had overwhelming air and naval superiority. There was no real challenger. China's military modernization over the past 2 decades has produced long-range ballistic missiles specifically designed to hold large, fixed targets at risk. Aircraft carriers, major air bases, places like Guam, where the U.S. has concentrated the bulk of its Western Pacific air power for generations. The logic that made large bases a strength, everything in one place, overwhelming capability, has become a vulnerability. One concentrated target is easier to destroy than 50 dispersed ones. The U.S. response to that problem is called agile combat employment. And to execute it, the military needs something very specific, a network of small, dispersed airstrips across the second island chain, each one capable of launching and recovering the F-35B, which needs as little as 3,000 feet of runway to operate. As it turns out, the Imperial Japanese Navy and the United States Marine Corps already built exactly that network between 1942 and 1945 at a cost of tens of thousands of lives. All America has to do is take it back from the jungle. Node 1, Guam, the anchor, the $8.9 billion bet. The anchor of the network is Guam. Guam is where American power in the Western Pacific has lived since 1944, when Marines took it back from Japanese forces in a brutal 21-day battle that killed more than 7,000 men on both sides. Andersen Air Force Base and Naval Base Guam have been there ever since. They are large, well-known, and by the Pentagon's own admission, increasingly exposed. But Guam isn't being scaled back. It's being doubled down on. The centerpiece is Marine Corps Base Camp Blaz, the first new American Marine base constructed anywhere in the world since 1952. The program budget sits between $8.6 and $8.9 billion. Roughly 4,000 Marines are permanently transferring to Guam from Okinawa, where political opposition to the American military presence had become untenable after decades of friction. Japan is funding approximately $3 billion of the relocation cost, a measure of how seriously Tokyo takes the strategic value of keeping those Marines in the Western Pacific, even if not on Japanese soil. The first contingent of roughly 100 logistics troops arrived in December 2024. The full relocation is expected to be completed by 2028. Alongside the base, the U.S. is constructing an integrated missile defense system, the first ever designed to provide persistent 360-degree protection of an American territory. Guam is being hardened even as it is recognized as a target, and the people of Guam are living with that tension directly. At Camp Blaz's opening, protesters made their position clear. A base this size makes the island more prominent on an adversary's targeting list. The military buildup has driven local housing prices sharply upward, prompting a $290 million housing allocation in the National Defense Authorization Act. Guam is not a hidden node. It is the logistics hub, the anchor from which everything else radiates. But its survival in a conflict may depend on the other 4 nodes are smaller, more remote, and far less known. And one of them is a runway that launched the atomic bomb. Node D2, Tinian, Northfield, the runway the Enola Gay used. 100 miles north of Guam lies Tinian, and this is where the history becomes impossible to separate from the present. Northfield Tinian was the largest airbase in the world in 1945. 6 runways, hundreds of B-29s, more aircraft than most countries have ever owned, operating around the clock. It was from Northfield's runway Able that the Enola Gay departed on August 6, 1945, bound for Hiroshima. 3 days later, Boxcar left the same island carrying the second bomb, bound for Nagasaki. Within weeks, the war was over. By 1947, Northfield was closed. By the 1990s, the jungle had consumed it so completely that you could walk across those runways and not know they were there. On April 10, 2024, the construction firm Fluor received a $49 million contract to restore Northfield over 5 years. By early 2025, workers had cleared 99% of the vegetation and begun laying asphalt, the first military pavement on Tinian in decades. The clearance work was not straightforward. Decades of tropical root growth had fractured the concrete. Unexploded ordnance from the war remained embedded throughout the site. And coordination with the National Park Service, North Field is a protected historic site, added months to the timeline. The runway that launched the atomic age had to be excavated with the care of an archaeological dig before it could be rebuilt as a military installation. The second Tinian project is the Divert Airfield, a $162 million expansion of the existing civilian airport to handle military tanker and cargo aircraft. Its purpose is direct. If Guam is taken offline in a conflict, Tinian becomes the fallback. Two islands are close enough to work as a system and different enough in profile to survive independently. Northfield's two primary runways are targeted for completion by 2027. But the most human story in this entire network isn't on Tinian. It's on a small island further south where the runway has a name, and that name belongs to a Marine who fought there and lived to write about it. Node 3, Peleliu Sledge Runway, the most human story in the network. The southernmost node in the network is Peleliu in the island nation of Palau, and its story is perhaps the most striking of all. In September 1944, 1st Marine Division landed on Peleliu expecting a 3-day battle. They fought for 2.5 months. More than 1,700 Marines were killed. Estimates of Japanese dead run as high as 10,000. The island's coral ridges, tunneled and fortified by Japanese engineers, had to be taken cave by cave, often with flamethrowers. The airfield the Marines were sent to capture, the strategic objective that justified the entire operation, was operational again within weeks of the landing. In 2024, Marines from the 7th Engineer Support Battalion returned to Peleliu, not to fight, to clear. Decades of vegetation came off the 1944 airfield. When the concrete beneath was exposed, engineers found it structurally sound. The original construction, built under wartime conditions in the early 1940s, had simply been waiting. No new construction was required. They named it Sledge Runway, after Private First Class Eugene Sledge, who fought on Peleliu and later wrote With the Old Breed, the memoir that became the basis for HBO's The Pacific. The name is not incidental. It is a deliberate act of institutional memory, connecting the men who paid for the runway in 1944 to the aircraft that will use it now. On June 22nd, 2024, a KC-130J Super Hercules made the first military fixed-wing landing on Peleliu in decades. In October 2025, the U.S. committed an additional $150 million to further airfield and port development on the island. Peleliu is no longer a one-rotation experiment. Node 4, YAP, the most exposed node, and the most contested. Yap is a small island in the Federated States of Micronesia, approximately 1,000 miles from China's coast. The airfield at Yap International Airport is a former Japanese military installation from the same war. In its fiscal year 2025 budget, the U.S. Air Force requested $400 million to extend the runway for military use. Initial funding of $96 million was allocated. The full program is not yet funded. In May 2025, the Yap state government signed an operational control agreement with the United States to facilitate construction work. But here is where the competition becomes visible. On May 26, 2025, China's state-owned Shandong Hangui Municipal Engineering broke ground on the reconstruction of a World War II-era airfield on Woliai, an atoll in Yap State, just 418 miles south of Guam. The project was officially framed as a civilian transportation improvement for residents. On the same island group where the United States is asking to extend a runway for military use, China has already started building. Yap is the node where the strategic competition is most visible, where the two projects are not metaphorically parallel, but geographically immediate. The outcome there is genuinely uncertain. The full American program remains unfunded. The Chinese project is already underway. And then there is the 5th node, which is different from all the others. It isn't a forward airstrip. It's the brain of the entire Pacific Missile Defense Network. Node 5, Kwajalein. The brain of the network, Ronald Reagan Ballistic Missile Defense Test Site. The 5th node is different from the others. It is not a forward airstrip, but a brain. Kwajalein Atoll in the Marshall Islands hosts the Ronald Reagan Ballistic Missile Defense Test Site, which handles intercept testing, long-range radar tracking, and monitoring of missiles fired across the Pacific during exercises. The U.S. lease on Kwajalein runs through 2066. The 2024 renewal of the Compact of Free Association between the United States and the Marshall Islands locked in that presence at the precise moment China was actively courting Pacific Island nations with infrastructure investment and security agreements. The Marshall Islands decision was as much a political statement as an economic calculation. The base is the second largest employer in the Marshall Islands. The military presence there is not just a strategic asset, it is a foundational part of the local economy. Landowners hold over $32 million in escrow from long-standing rent disputes. A reminder that the presence is neither simple nor unconflicted, even where it is broadly accepted. The competition, the same ground, twice. Zoom out and a pattern becomes visible. In Enola, Palau, Chinese investors have leased hundreds of thousands of square meters of land near a U.S. over-the-horizon radar installation, including plots adjacent to the airstrip. On Canton Island in Kiribati, China is pursuing restoration of a defunct American airfield, officially framed, again, as civilian development. At Tinian Harbor, a Chinese-linked casino holds an operating permit with a clear sight line to the maritime approach used by U.S. supply ships. The Solomon Islands signed a security pact with China in 2022 and denied port access to U.S. and British warships. On some of the most remote islands on Earth, the same ground that American and Japanese forces tore apart from 1942 to 1945, one fought with construction contracts, lease agreements, and investment frameworks rather than artillery. The geometry of the second island chain only works if the political relationships holding it together remain intact. That is not guaranteed. Palau's president wrote directly to the U.S. Secretary of Defense in 2020 requesting joint facilities. The Marshall Islands locked in their lease, but the Solomons went the other way. Each node in this network is as much a diplomatic achievement as an engineering one, which raises the question the entire network depends on: is dispersal actually stronger than concentration? Or does spreading forces thin create its own vulnerabilities? Geometry over armor. For 75 years, American Pacific strategy ran on the logic of concentration, mass capability in one place, overwhelm any adversary with the sheer weight of force. It worked because no adversary could threaten those concentrations directly. That era is over. Agile combat employment is the institutional acknowledgement of that fact. Spread the aircraft, rotate unpredictably, force an adversary to strike dozens of targets simultaneously rather than one or two. Make the cost of a first strike so high and so uncertain that it becomes irrational. The F-35B is the technology that makes the dispersal viable, but the runways are what make it real, and the runways were already there. Built at enormous human cost by two nations fighting for control of the same strategic geography that the United States and China are now contesting in a different register. From Peleliu, U.S. Marine aircraft are approximately 1,000 miles from Manila. Before this network, the nearest comparable Marine contingent was in Hawaii, more than 4,600 miles away. That is not a marginal difference. It is the difference between being present in a crisis and arriving after it. What makes this network genuinely new is not the airstrips. It is the philosophy behind them. Resilience through geometry rather than armor. Strength through distribution rather than mass. Tinian's North Field, the runway the Enola Gay used, is targeted for completion in 2027. Paving is already underway. The construction that began in the shadow of the most destructive war in human history is beginning again, on the same islands, for the same reason. Whoever controls these runways controls the Pacific. The question is, who gets there first? Which part of this story surprised you most? The World War II runways still being structurally sound? The Chinese construction on the same islands? Or the scale of what's being spent? Tell me in the comments. I genuinely want to know what's landing. Subscribe for more superstructures investigations.